When I was 19, I spent an autumn in Salem, Massachusetts, living with my uncle who owned a funeral home that had been in our family for 3 generations. The place always smelled of cold steel, candle wax, and formaldehyde, a scent that seemed to sink into your clothes no matter how long you stayed. From the first night I arrived, I felt like I was being watched, even when I was completely alone. My uncle was a quiet, strange man with odd habits and a list of rules that felt more like warnings. Never answer the front door after midnight. Always knock twice before entering the prep room. And most importantly, never open the 3rd casket in the cold room. He didn't say it like a joke. His face went pale when he mentioned that 3rd casket. His eyes locked on mine to make sure I understood. I told myself it was just some creepy initiation thing, like hazing me into the family business. Still, I nodded. The cold room was always locked, and only my uncle had the key. One night, about 3 weeks into my stay, he was called out unexpectedly. Before leaving, he grabbed my shoulder and stared straight into my eyes. "Do not go into the cold room," he said. "No matter what you hear." That last part, "no matter what you hear," it clung to me like a thorn in the back of my mind. The funeral home creaked like an old ship that night. The wind pressed against the walls, and pipes moaned in the dark. I tried distracting myself with paperwork, but around 1:30 a.m., I heard it, a soft knock. I thought someone was at the front door, but when I checked, the porch was empty. Then it came again, louder, but from the back hallway, from behind the cold room door. I froze. It wasn't a random noise. It was 3 deliberate knocks. Slow, like something or someone inside was asking to be let out. I backed away, my chest tight, trying to convince myself it was nothing but shifting trays or a noisy compressor. But when the knocking stopped, the silence was even worse. My uncle's words echoed, "No matter what you hear." I lasted until 2:45 a.m. before curiosity cracked me open like glass. The cold room was just down the hallway, and the key to it hung on the office wall. I told myself I wasn't going to open anything. Just check. Just look. The key slid into the lock with a metallic click that seemed too loud in the stillness. When I pushed open the door, a gust of frigid air hit me like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The lights flickered as if they didn't want me there. 3 caskets rested on steel trays, their lids bolted shut. But my attention locked on the 3rd one, the one my uncle warned me about. It was older than the rest, dented on the side, rust streaking its edges like dried blood. It had no tag, no paperwork, no name. Every other body we had ever received had records. This one, nothing. The 2nd casket rattled suddenly. I flinched, stumbling back, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I pressed my ear against the cool metal, almost against my better judgment. And I heard it, breathing, slow, steady, like something inside was alive. My blood went ice cold. I slammed the cold room door, locking it so hard my knuckles stung. I didn't sleep a second until sunrise. When my uncle returned at dawn, he took one look at my face and didn't have to ask. He saw the key still hanging loosely on my trembling fingers. Without saying a word, he went straight to the cold room. I heard him sigh from behind the door, deep, weary, as if confirming something he wished wasn't true. When he came back, his voice was quiet. "I told you not to open it." "I didn't," I said, "but I heard something. Breathing." For the first time, I saw fear on his face. "That's why you don't listen too long," he muttered. "It wants attention, and once you give it that, it follows." He explained, "Years ago, a delivery truck mistakenly dropped off that casket. There was no name, no order, no history. My grandfather, who ran the place back then, refused to send it back. Not long after, lights started flickering, rooms turned ice cold, and whispers crept through the vents at night. They tried burying it once," my uncle said. "The man who attempted it, We found him the next morning, collapsed on the floor. Eyes wide, lips blue. Whatever's in there, it doesn't belong to the ground. And it doesn't like to be ignored. That night, I lay awake in the guest room. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, not knocking, not breathing, but a whisper. And it said my name. The next morning, my uncle looked me in the eyes and said, "You need to leave. Once it knows you're listening, you can't stay here anymore." I left Salem that week. But the knocking followed me, sometimes on closet doors, sometimes on windows. Always 3 knocks. Always waiting. I used to help out at my uncle's funeral home in Seattle, a narrow building wedged between a rusted auto shop and an abandoned dry cleaner on Rainier Avenue. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than any part-time job I'd had. The place had been around since the 1920s, and no matter how hard we scrubbed, the air always carried the same cold, hollow smell, a mix of bleach, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers left too long in the sun. The day the child's coffin arrived, I remember because the delivery driver looked terrified. His eyes darted toward the alley as if someone, or something, might follow him. He didn't speak, just handed my uncle a clipboard to sign. The coffin itself was small, white, with silver trim, the kind you see in movies but never imagine touching in real life. Even through my gloves, I felt a chill radiating from the surface, colder than the refrigerated truck it had arrived in. As we wheeled it into the cold room, I noticed my uncle hesitating. He stared at the coffin like it was a loaded gun. "We weren't expecting this one," he muttered, his brow furrowing. I asked what he meant, but he didn't answer. Instead, he went straight to his office and began flipping through our thick record binder. By the time I peeked in, he was cursing under his breath, a rare sign something was very wrong. "There's no name," he said. "No paperwork, no request, nothing. This came from a dispatch center, not a family. No funeral home sends a body without notice," I said. "Exactly," he replied, slamming the binder shut. For the rest of the day, the funeral home felt off. The chapel stayed dark, and every creak of the building seemed sharper, heavier. That night, I stayed late to help with closing tasks. My uncle left for a meeting with the coroner's office and told me to lock up. As I passed the cold room, I felt it. The air wasn't just cold, it was charged. Static crawled across my arms like invisible fingers. I paused, my gaze falling on the white coffin in the center of the room. I told myself not to touch it, but something about the silence in that room made my chest tighten. I left quickly, pulling the door shut. The next morning, my uncle looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. Over coffee, I asked if everything was okay with the delivery. He just shook his head. "Do me a favor," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Don't go into the cold room for a while." That wasn't normal. I had cleaned that room dozens of times. Why not now? The unease built like a splinter under my skin. By lunchtime, curiosity won. With my uncle gone, I approached the cold room. I told myself I'd just look, nothing more. But the moment I opened the door, I knew I shouldn't have. The air was heavier than before, damp and biting cold. The coffin sat untouched in the center of the floor, but there was something new. Frosty fingerprints, 5 small prints, were marked across the lid. Not dust, not smudges. Frost. I backed away, slammed the door, and locked it without even thinking. My uncle returned a short time later and saw the fear on my face. He didn't even ask. He just said, "You went in, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed, looking like a man who had finally lost a fight he'd been waging alone. I found the dispatch record. It was routed from an Idaho funeral home, one that's been shut down for 8 years. That night, I stayed behind after closing. I told myself I'd just watch from the hallway, just to see what my uncle would do. Around 11 p.m., I saw him wheel the coffin out of the cold room. He opened the lid slowly, his face bathed in the dim yellow light of the prep table. He froze. Then I heard him whisper, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." His voice cracked. Every light in the hallway flickered once. Just once. And the air went still. Too still, like the room was holding its breath. My skin prickled as I hid in the shadows, my own heartbeat thunderous. My uncle closed the lid carefully, as though tucking someone in, and wheeled the coffin back to the cold room. He locked it with a different key, one I'd never seen before, and left without saying a word. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the frost prints. Who had left them? Who put that child in there? 3 days later, things got worse. It was Thursday afternoon when she arrived. A woman, wearing an old wool coat and gloves, even though the day was mild. Her voice was soft, but unnervingly firm. "I'm here for my daughter," she said. I asked her name. She didn't give one. She just stared at me, her eyes hollow and pale, and said, "White coffin, silver edges. She's in the cold room." My stomach sank. How did she know? I told her to wait while I fetched my uncle, but when we returned, she was gone. We checked the security cameras. There was footage of her entering the lobby, walking slowly toward the front desk, but no footage of her leaving. The doors never opened. That night, my uncle moved the coffin to the back chamber, a place we rarely used, and told me not to ask questions anymore. But I couldn't stop thinking about the woman, or the way she seemed to know. The next night, I returned to the funeral home after hours. I knew the code. I walked into the back chamber with a flashlight, my breath already fogging in the air. The coffin sat there, silent, still. I told myself I wouldn't open it, but something inside me wouldn't let me walk away. I reached out, fingers trembling, and slowly lifted the lid. It was empty. For a moment, my mind refused to believe it. I stared at the cold satin interior, my heart pounding, when I heard it, a soft creak, like footsteps on old boards. But the floor beneath me was solid concrete. Then I saw them, tiny footprints forming in the frost, one by one, leading away from the coffin. I didn't think. I slammed the lid shut, locked the chamber door, and ran. I drove aimlessly through the night until the sun rose, unable to go home, unable to shake the thought that the child wasn't inside the coffin anymore. When I finally spoke to my uncle, his voice was empty. "I've seen her too," he said. "She doesn't stay in one place. Doors open by themselves. Lights turn off. Sometimes I hear her singing." I asked why he didn't get rid of the coffin. "Because it won't let us," he said. "We tried once. Drove it to the crematory. The truck lost its brakes halfway there. When we got back, it was sitting in the cold room like it had never left." I quit a few months later. My uncle still runs the place, but he doesn't speak much anymore. Every now and then, I get calls from his number, silent calls filled with static. I haven't set foot in that funeral home for over a year. But some nights, I dream about the child. In my dreams, she's standing beside the white coffin. This time, her eyes are open. I started my internship at Martin & Sons Funeral Home in Milwaukee last summer. I didn't have much experience, but they were desperate for help, and I was desperate for a job. The building was a squat, brick structure with faded lettering on the sign and windows so coated in dust they looked permanently gray. The first day I arrived, Martin, the owner, greeted me with a handshake that felt too firm, like he wanted to make sure I stayed in place. He was a wiry man with sunken eyes and a face that looked carved by sleepless nights. Despite his calm voice, everything he said sounded like a warning. On my very first walkthrough, he told me the 2 rules. Respect the bodies. Never go into the basement. I remember laughing nervously. Is that a joke? Martin didn't laugh. He just looked at me, expressionless. I'm serious. Don't go down there. There's nothing you need to see. The way he said it, soft but unshakable, made my skin crawl. I didn't ask why. The funeral home itself smelled of roses and formaldehyde, a smell that clung to my clothes, my hair, even my skin. The cold room was always unnervingly quiet, not peaceful quiet, but heavy, tense quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. During my first week, nothing unusual happened. I handled phone calls, polished caskets, and set up viewing rooms. But by the second week, the building started noticing me. It began with a tapping sound, faint, irregular. It came from behind the cold room wall, just on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was pipes or an old compressor. But the taps didn't sound mechanical. They sounded deliberate. One day, while Martin was prepping a body, I mentioned it casually. You'll hear things sometimes, he said without looking up. Don't answer them. Don't answer them? The phrase hit me in the gut. I tried to laugh it off, but the way he avoided my eyes made my stomach tighten. The day after I found the seam in the wall, I couldn't focus on anything else. It felt like the panel was calling to me every time I passed that hallway, as if it knew I had seen it. Martin noticed I was distracted. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, half smiling. Just tired, I lied. But I wasn't tired. I was obsessed. Every part of me wanted to know why a basement would need to be hidden, why Martin had been so adamant about the second rule. The way he said never go into the basement kept replaying in my head, like a stuck record. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the funeral home's creaking floors and the faint tapping I'd heard behind the cold room wall. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark staircase, its concrete steps descending into blackness that seemed almost alive. By the third day, I cracked. It was late evening when I found myself alone in the funeral home again. Martin had left early, muttering something about meeting with a supplier. The place felt unusually quiet. No hum from the old refrigerator units. No sound from the street outside. Just silence, broken only by the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights. As I walked down the hallway, the seam in the wall caught my eye again. This time, I didn't hesitate. My hand trembled as I pressed against it. The panel gave way with a heavy clunk, and the wall slid slightly inward, just enough to reveal the staircase. I froze, staring at the darkness. It wasn't just dark, it was oppressive, like the air itself refused to let light touch it. A cold draft rushed up from below, carrying a damp, earthy smell that made me shiver. It smelled like wet stone and old soil. For a long moment, I stood there, flashlight in hand, my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself I'd just take one look. Just a single step, enough to satisfy my curiosity. The first step groaned under my foot. My flashlight beam cut across the rough concrete walls, revealing old pipes and cobwebs thick enough to look like gauze. The air grew colder with each breath I took, so cold that I could see my own breath swirling in the beam of light. I went down 3 steps before my instincts screamed at me to stop. The silence was too heavy, too aware. I felt like someone, or something, was standing just beyond the beam of my flashlight, watching. Suddenly, I heard a sound. Not loud, but sharp enough to freeze me in place. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from below. I stopped breathing, my heart thundering. I strained my ears, wondering if I was imagining it. Then came the second sound, breathing. Slow, rhythmic, like something alive was waiting just around the corner of the blackness. Every muscle in my body tightened. I backed up, step by step, not taking my eyes off the dark pit below. The moment my feet hit the ground floor, I shoved the panel closed and leaned against it, trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I blinked, I saw the faint outline of those stairs, felt the cold creeping up my legs like mist. What was down there? Why would a funeral home have something so secret it needed to be sealed behind a false wall? I didn't have answers, but I knew I wouldn't be able to leave it alone. The next morning, Martin looked tense. He kept pacing near the front door, locking and unlocking it as if checking the mechanism. He didn't look up when he asked, "Did you touch the cold room last night?" I lied. No. He didn't believe me. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened. Later, I caught him standing in front of the wall panel. He wasn't opening it, just resting his hand on it, his eyes closed. It looked like he was listening. That night, I broke. I came back after hours with a flashlight, the memory of the breathing still in my mind. My hands trembled as I slid the panel open. The dark stairwell yawned at me like a throat. One step at a time, I descended, the flashlight's beam barely cutting through the black. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Not normal cold, wet, heavy, like the air in a sealed crypt. At the bottom was a metal door with a heavy lock. It looked newer than the stairs, as if someone had installed it recently. My hand shook as I tried the handle. Locked. In the corner, I spotted a rusted crowbar. The moment I picked it up, I felt that same wave of dread, like I was crossing an invisible line. I wedged the crowbar under the lock and pulled. The lock gave with a deafening screech. When I pushed the door open, my stomach dropped. The room beyond was small, dim, and lined with white plastic body bags. They were stacked on tables, on shelves, and in the corner like discarded trash. And some of them were moving. Not all at once. Just little twitches, tiny shifts as if something inside was adjusting its weight. My pulse thundered as I stepped back, the beam of my flashlight trembling. Then I heard it. "Help me." A whisper, so faint it sounded like it was coming from all directions. It was muffled, like a voice buried under dirt. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't breathe. I turned to run, but something caught my eye. A single body bag, crumpled on the ground near the far wall, separate from the rest. My mind screamed don't, but my body moved anyway. I crouched down, my hands shaking, and reached for the zipper. The second I touched it, the whispering stopped. The silence was crushing. I unzipped the bag slowly. Inside was a child. A small, pale child with bruises around its neck, the marks dark and unmistakable. Its eyes were closed, but its face looked too fresh, too alive. In its tiny hand was a scrap of paper with one word: "Please." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, and dropped the flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. I grabbed the light, bolted for the stairs, and didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping in the humid night air.